and also, I loved all of his gospel songs too. And meeting him was at that point, a high thrill.
In the dark corners of Greenwich Village's coffee houses, a young man with a rough voice and big dreams was quietly absorbing everything around him. Bob Dylan, who would later become one of America's greatest songwriters, wasn't just creating music from nothing. He was like a sponge, soaking up sounds from all over American music history and turning them into something completely new. Dylan once said that he learned everything from other people. "You can't really learn to write songs sitting in a classroom at some university," he explained. "You learn by listening to records and copying what you hear." The artists he chose to copy tell us a lot about how a small-town kid from Minnesota became one of the most important musicians of all time. Dylan's musical education came from many different places. Some influences helped shape his early folk music, while others pushed him toward electric rock. But all of them left their mark on the songs that would change music forever. Here are the 6 most important musical influences that helped create Bob Dylan's legendary sound. The Stanley Brothers, mountain music that touched his soul. The 6th most important influence on Dylan might surprise many people. The Stanley Brothers were a bluegrass duo from Virginia who captured young Dylan's imagination long before he ever thought about playing electric guitar. Carter and Ralph Stanley weren't household names like some pop stars, but they had something special that spoke to Dylan's heart. Dylan discovered the Stanley Brothers' music in the late 1950s when he was diving deep into American folk music. He wasn't listening to the same pop music that other teenagers were enjoying. Instead, he was studying something much older and more authentic. A music historian named Greil Marcus reported that Dylan once said Carter Stanley's voice was like hearing an ancient bell that had been ringing in the mountains for 1,000 years. What drew Dylan to the Stanley Brothers wasn't just their beautiful harmonies. It was their connection to something deeper and more real. They represented authentic American storytelling that came straight from the mountains and coal mines of Virginia. While other musicians were trying to please radio stations and record companies, the Stanley Brothers were just being themselves, singing about real life and real struggles. Dylan told an interviewer in 1997 that the Stanley Brothers were carrying the real thing. They weren't performing music like actors on a stage, he said. They were living it. This idea of authenticity became very important to Dylan's own approach to making music. He learned from them that the best music comes from real experiences and honest emotions. You can hear the Stanley Brothers' influence in Dylan's early work, especially in songs like Man of Constant Sorrow from his first album. Their high, lonesome sound taught Dylan that music could be both very old and very immediate at the same time. It could honor traditions while still feeling fresh and revolutionary. The Stanley Brothers showed Dylan something important about American music. The deepest and most meaningful songs didn't come from the mainstream music industry. They came from the edges, from people who had something real to say and weren't worried about being commercial. Carter Stanley's haunting voice and Ralph's driving banjo created a template for emotional honesty that Dylan would carry with him throughout his entire career. Hank Williams, the master of heartbreak songs. Coming in at number 5 is Hank Williams, who Dylan has called the master of the universe. Williams taught Dylan the fundamentals of American songwriting and showed him how powerful, simple, honest songs could be. Dylan's respect for Williams runs so deep that he credits the coup, Natri legend, with teaching him everything about how to write songs that matter. Dylan discovered Hank Williams during his teenage years in Hibbing, Minnesota. He would stay up late listening to radio broadcasts from the Grand Ole Opry, where Williams was one of the biggest stars. In his memoir called Chronicles, Dylan wrote that hearing Williams sing "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry" was like getting struck by lightning. Suddenly, he understood what songs could really do. What amazed Dylan about Hank Williams wasn't just his voice, though it was certainly distinctive. It was his ability to turn his own personal pain into something that everyone could understand and feel. While other country singers were playing it safe and singing about simple, happy things, Williams was putting his whole heart on the record. He was turning his heartbreak into 3-minute masterpieces that cut straight to the core of human emotion. Dylan told Rolling Stone magazine in 1969 that Hank Williams was the first person to make him realize that songs could be literature. Williams wasn't just singing, Dylan said. He was confessing. This idea had a huge impact on how Dylan thought about songwriting. He learned that the best songs don't just entertain people. They tell the truth about what it's like to be human, even when that truth is painful or uncomfortable. You can hear Williams' influence throughout Dylan's entire body of work. From the storytelling in Tangled Up in Blue to the raw emotion of his album Blood on the Tracks, Dylan learned from Williams that the best songs come from the darkest places in our hearts. Authenticity requires vulnerability, and Williams showed Dylan that being vulnerable in a song could actually make you stronger as an artist. Williams also taught Dylan that country music wasn't just about fiddles and steel guitars. At its heart, it was about telling the truth. Williams's troubled life and genius songwriting proved that real songwriters don't just try to make people feel good. They dig deep into the human condition and serve it up with a melody that stays with you forever. The Everly Brothers. Perfect harmony meets rock and roll. At number 4, we have the Everly Brothers, the harmony duo from Kentucky who showed Dylan how to bridge country music and rock and roll in ways that seemed impossible before they did it. Don and Phil Everly weren't just singers. They were architects of a completely new sound that would influence everyone from the Beatles to Simon and Garfunkel. Dylan discovered the Everly Brothers in the late 1950s when their hit Bye Bye Love was all over the radio. According to music journalist Robert Shelton, Dylan was completely mesmerized by their ability to blend country storytelling with rock and roll energy. It seemed effortless, but Dylan could tell there was incredible skill behind what they were doing. What fascinated Dylan most about the Everly Brothers was their brotherly chemistry. They had two distinct voices, but when they sang together, they became something bigger than either one could be alone. Their harmonies were so tight and perfect that they seemed to be reading each other's minds. They created a sound that felt both intimate, like they were singing just for you, and expansive, like it could fill up the biggest concert hall in the world. Dylan told Rolling Stone in 1978 that the Everly Brothers had a brotherly sound that nobody else could touch. When they sang together, it was like hearing one person with two souls, he said. This idea of voices blending while maintaining their individual character became something Dylan would explore in his own music, especially during his electric period. You can trace the Everly Brothers' influence through songs like I Want You and Just Like a Woman. Their ability to make complex emotions sound effortless taught Dylan that sophistication doesn't require showing off or being pretentious. Sometimes the most powerful music sounds simple on the surface, but has incredible depth underneath. The Everly Brothers also showed Dylan how to modernize traditional sounds without losing what made them special in the first place. They took the kind of harmonies that had been sung in Appalachian mountains for generations and dressed them up for the rock and roll generation. They created a blueprint that Dylan would follow throughout his career, showing him that innovation often comes from synthesis, taking old things and making them new while still honoring where they came from. Buddy Holly, the thinking person's rock star. At number 3, we have Buddy Holly, the bespectacled genius from Texas who showed Dylan that rock and roll could be both rebellious and intelligent. Holly wasn't just a performer who sang other people's songs. He was a songwriter, producer, and innovator who controlled every aspect of his music. This independence had a huge impact on how Dylan thought about his own career. Dylan discovered Buddy Holly in 1959, just months before Holly's tragic death in a plane crash. According to Dylan's autobiography, seeing Holly perform live in Duluth was a life-changing moment that completely shifted his musical perspective. Here was someone who proved that you could be a rock and roll star while also being smart and creative. What captivated Dylan about Holly was his complete independence. While other rock stars relied on teams of writers and producers to create their music, Holly was a one-man creative force. He wrote his own songs, played his own instruments, and controlled his own sound. This showed Dylan that it was possible to be both popular and authentic, both commercial and artistic. Dylan told the Los Angeles Times in 1997 that Buddy Holly was the first one to show him the way. Holly made it look possible for someone like Dylan to actually make a career in music while staying true to his own vision. This was incredibly important for Dylan, who was trying to figure out how to be a serious artist in a business that often seemed to value image over substance. Holly's influence appears throughout Dylan's career, from his early rock experiments to his later Americana albums. Songs like Subterranean Homesick Blues echo Holly's rhythmic wordplay, while Dylan's do-it-yourself recording approach mirrors Holly's studio innovations. Holly showed Dylan that you could experiment with sounds and techniques while still making music that people wanted to hear. Most importantly, Holly taught Dylan that rock and roll didn't have to be dumb. His songs were clever without being pretentious, catchy without being shallow. This combination became one of Dylan's signature qualities. Holly proved that authenticity and intelligence could coexist in popular music, paving the way for everything that would follow in Dylan's revolutionary career. The Band, musical brotherhood at its finest. At number 2, we have The Band, the group of Canadian and American musicians who became Dylan's most important creative partnership. What started as a backing band evolved into a musical brotherhood that changed the course of rock history. Their collaboration with Dylan produced some of the most influential music of the 1960s and beyond. Dylan first met the band in 1965 when they were still called the Hawks, backing rockabilly legend Ronnie Hawkins. According to guitarist Robbie Robertson, Dylan was looking for musicians who could match his intensity during his controversial transition from folk music to Electric Row. He needed people who weren't afraid of the audience's boos, and who could help him create something completely new. What made the band special wasn't just their individual musicianship, though each member was incredibly talented. It was their chemistry as a group. These weren't hired musicians just playing Dylan's songs exactly as written. They were collaborators who understood his vision and pushed it even further. Their rootsy Americana sound gave Dylan's electric experiments a timeless quality that made the music feel both modern and ancient. Dylan told Rolling Stone in 1978 that the band was the best group he ever worked with. They could play anything and make it sound like it belonged in some backwoods barn, he said. This ability to make sophisticated music sound natural and effortless was exactly what Dylan needed as he was reinventing himself as an artist. The partnership reached its peak during the legendary Basement Tapes sessions in 1967. Holed up in a house in Woodstock, New York, Dylan and the band created a completely new kind of American music. It was relaxed and playful, but deeply rooted in folk traditions. They weren't trying to make hit records or please record companies. They were just exploring musical ideas and having fun, which resulted in some of the most influential recordings in rock history. The band taught Dylan that collaboration could enhance rather than compromise his artistic vision. When you work with the right people, they don't just play your music. They help you discover music you didn't even know you had in you. Their influence appears on masterpieces like Blood on the Tracks and Desire, where Dylan's storytelling merged perfectly with their intuitive musicianship. Together, Dylan and the band proved that rock music could be both revolutionary and traditional at the same time. They created a template that countless artists still follow today, showing that the best music often comes from combining different traditions and influences rather than and trying to create something completely from scratch. The Beatles, the ultimate creative challenge. At number 1, we have the Beatles, the Fab Four from Liverpool, who pushed Dylan into his most revolutionary period and sparked a musical arms race that changed everything. John, Paul, George, and Ringo weren't just Dylan's contemporaries in the music business. They were his greatest creative challenge and inspiration, pushing each other to heights neither could have reached alone. Dylan first heard the Beatles in 1964 when I Want to Hold Your Hand exploded across America. According to journalist Al Aronowitz, Dylan was initially dismissive of their music, calling it bubblegum, but something about their energy and innovation kept drawing him back. He couldn't ignore the fact that they were doing something special, even if it was different from his own approach. What changed Dylan's mind was realizing that the Beatles were evolving at incredible speed. Each album showed new sophistication, new experiments, and new boundaries being broken. They were doing what Dylan thought only he could do, constantly reinventing themselves and refusing to be put in any one musical box. This realization both challenged and inspired him. Dylan told Rolling Stone in 2007 that the Beatles were doing things nobody else was doing. They weren't just following the rules that other musicians followed, he said. They were writing new rules every time they stepped into the recording studio. This fearlessness in the face of expectations had a huge impact on Dylan's own willingness to take risks with his music. The mutual influence between Dylan and the Beatles became legendary in music history. Dylan introduced the Beatles to deeper lyrical possibilities, showing them that pop songs could tackle serious subjects and complex emotions. Meanwhile, the Beatles showed Dylan the power of studio experiments, imitation and electric arrangements, proving that you could be artistic and popular at the same time. Their famous meetings in 1964 and 1965 created a creative feedback loop that revolutionized popular music. The Beatles' album Rubber Soul pushed Dylan toward creating Blonde on Blonde, while Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone inspired the Beatles to write songs like Norwegian Wood. Each group was trying to top what the other had done, and the result was an incredible burst of creativity that benefited everyone who listened to music. The Beatles taught Dylan perhaps the most important lesson of his career. Being popular didn't mean selling out. It meant reaching more people with your vision and potentially changing the world one song at a time. This understanding allowed Dylan to embrace his success without feeling like he was compromising his artistic integrity. The legacy of influences. These 6 musical influences show us how Bob Dylan became the artist we know today. From the Stanley Brothers' mountain authenticity to the Beatles' pop innovation, each influence contributed something essential to Dylan's musical DNA. He didn't just copy what these artists did, he absorbed their lessons and transformed them into something uniquely his own. What makes Dylan's story so fascinating is how he combined influences that might seem contradictory. He could take the raw honesty of Hank Williams and combine it with the studio sophistication of the Beatles. He could blend the traditional harmonies of the Everly Brothers with the independence of Buddy Holly. This ability to synthesize different influences into something new became one of his greatest strengths as an artist. Dylan's example shows us that great artists aren't just born with talent, they're also great listeners and learners. They pay attention to what came before them, understand what made it special, and then find ways to build on that foundation. Dylan's influences remind us that creativity is often about connection and combination, rather than creating something entirely from nothing. The story of Dylan's influences also shows us the importance of being open to different kinds of music. Dylan didn't limit himself to one genre or style. He listened to bluegrass and country, rock and roll and folk, traditional music and contemporary hits. This openness allowed him to create a sound that was both deeply rooted in American musical traditions and completely revolutionary. Today, Bob Dylan is himself an influence on countless musicians around the world. But his story reminds us that even the most original artists build on what came before them. The 6 bands and artists that shaped Dylan's sound continue to influence music today, not just through their own recordings, but through the way they helped create one of the most important voices in American music history.